Well, welcome everyone. I'm so excited to be invited back to do this workshop for everyone. My name is Dr. Trisha Monahan. I either go by Dr. Monahan, by Trisha. I really truly don't have a preference. So first, I'm just going to start with who is the Counseling Center? Who are we? And so the University Counseling Center is located in the SQ Student Life Center, which is near Wellness, the Globe, and the Career Center. We are above the movie theater, and now we're above Paint-A-Pot as well. Our staff is comprised of more than 40 individuals, 40 therapists. That includes licensed psychologists like myself, as well as mental health counselors, licensed clinical social workers, registered art therapists. We do have a larger training program. So we have pre-doctoral interns, we have practicum students, we have master's level interns, and then we also have an undergraduate peer educator group called Renew. And so we are very lucky to have the diversity that we do have at the Counseling Center. Our services are free for everyone. So just know that they are free for you. They are confidential, which essentially means that we can't tell anyone that you're showing up. And so I think that's a really important thing for most people to note. Everyone initiates services at the Counseling Center through a walk-in process. And so that occurs Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. Currently, we do have a hybrid of in-person as well as Zoom. Most people still stick with the telehealth piece just because additional follow-up appointments are still over telehealth. So that's just an important thing to know. We do offer individual, couples, as well as group counseling. We have outreach presentations like the one that I'm doing today. I think it's also important to note that we do have an after hours number, and that has after hours counselors on duty. So regardless if we're technically closed, the phone number still works the same and you would be able to get a hold of a counselor. So just do know that we are really there for you 24/7. Now the dates are off on these. However, we still offer all of these workshops. And if you see up top in the right-hand corner, that tells you where to go to. So the counseling.fsu.edu, then outreach and presentations, and then the highlighted trainings and events. So we offer all of these workshops consistently every single week and also upon request. I send a lot of students to the Real Talk Anxiety and Depression. It really just talks about what are those difficulties and how some skills on how to manage it. So those are really great. The Open Art Studio, the mindfulness, the resilient mind, these are all just really gaining skills to help manage a lot of stress. So do know that those are great resources. They're also free. They also require as much or as little participation as you want. So if you just want to go and listen and gain the information, you're welcome to do that. You don't necessarily have to be an active participant to still gain the information from all of those presentations. So common concerns that we see at the Counseling Center, I generally like to say there's no concern too small to come to the Counseling Center for. We're really here for you. That is the function of the Counseling Center, is to provide therapeutic services. And so we see kind of anything and a lot more than is on this list. Now, for graduate students in general, we see depression, we see anxiety, we do see substance use and abuse, as well as just family stress, because going through graduate school, as well as having to be a real human, as I like to say, those are tough things to be doing all at the exact same time. Time management, also just how do I get through this dissertation process? Sometimes managing and working with your chair who has a different personality than you can be really challenging, or working with other cohort members or people in your lab, that can also be challenging. And so again, no issue too small to come to the Counseling Center, and we are there to support you in any number of things. So don't feel like, oh, my issue is not big enough, because that's just simply not true. Renew is the last one. So this is our peer educator group. A graduate student does oversee all of our graduate students who run this. A lot of times our graduate students don't necessarily use this, but may send some of their students who they teach. They will send them here to help. But Renew is great because they do time management, they do organization, they do study skills, as well as interpersonal difficulties. And so they really have a breadth of presentations, but also one-on-one sessions. And it's technically actually 2-on-1. So 2 Renew members to 1 individual. And so they can really help not only undergrads, but graduate students as well. I just think it's important knowing that all of you are graduate students, that who you would be meeting with is an undergrad. So On to really the presentation part of everything. So one thing we do know is that life is full of stress, right? And life is full of a lot of stressors. And so I love to use metaphors, and I really see life as kind of a lot of juggling, right? We're a juggling act. And so we have to juggle a lot of our stressors. And so if people are willing to put it in the chat, I'm wondering some of the stressors that people feel like they have to juggle. Yes, teaching, absolutely. And grading, oh, yes, absolutely. What are some others? Home life, very much so, right? We're still real people outside of being a graduate student. Research, teaching, yep. Dissertation, oh, yes, that one's so much fun. And then taking care of ourselves on top of writing our dissertation and teaching, absolutely. What else? Relationships, romantic and platonic, absolutely. Accepting critique, yes, absolutely. So as we can see that as we continue to allow people to chime in, more and more balls get thrown in the air, right? And it becomes a huge juggling act of all of these things. When more and more, as stress increases, as we have more and more balls in the air, what happens to some of those, do we think? I know I dropped some. I don't know about other people, right? I may be able to pick them back up and throw it back in the air real fast, but we drop some of those balls. The more and more that get added, also meaning the more stress we have and the more ways our attention and concentration is stretched through our life, the more likely we are to drop one of those balls. And that makes perfect sense. And so sometimes in life, we have to make choices of what ball is okay to drop right now, why I keep other ones in the air. So I think just realizing and using this analogy, because sometimes we sit back and ask, why am I so overwhelmed? But if we use this metaphor and this analogy of juggling, I think we can really appreciate why we become so overwhelmed. If we have 20 balls in the air, it is likely that one is going to drop at one point in time. So again, with the chat, how do people attempt to de-stress? What are some strategies that others use to try to manage this stress? Exercise, that's a great one. Absolutely. What else? Self-care, very much so. Music, journaling, yes, wonderful. What are some others that people use? Lists, oh, I love lists, yes. Having a writing group, that is very cool. Yes. Therapy, very much time. Baby time, yes. Also, animal time is also a good one too if you have fur babies. Outsource stressors, yes, absolutely. So paying for meal prep, that is a great one. Sometimes we just have to say like, I have to drop this ball, but I can figure out a different way to still have it in my life. Talking to people under similar scenarios and circumstances, very much so. Talking with friends, absolutely. We know the research actually supports that social support is one of the biggest things that can get us through so much in our life. So having that is so important. Some other stress management strategies that are really important to think about is not only how do we think about ourselves and think about the situation, but also some of the behaviors that we're engaging in. So first, with the healthy living side, a lot of times when stress increases, things like sleep go to the wayside. We start to eat chips out of the vending machine instead of a healthy meal, right? We tend to drink a lot of caffeine as I sip my Starbucks cup of coffee instead of drinking water. We tend to exercise less, maybe not get as much social support as we'd want because we don't have time to call that person. And so the difficulty with that is these are the very basics that actually help us think more clearly, help us be more efficient and effective and have energy. So when clients come into my office, regardless of whatever issue they want to work on, when they're reporting to me, I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed and fatigued, I say, how is your eating, your sleep, and your exercise and the amount of water you're drinking? And if they're telling me their sleep is terrible, their eating's terrible, I say we can't do anything else until we get that back on track, because eating, certain signs of hunger can mimic anxiety and stress because we might become jittery. Our thoughts will become clouded. Our thinking won't be very linear or clear. we'll get more easily overwhelmed because we don't have the nutrition we need. The same thing with lack of sleep and dehydration. And so we really need to make sure that we're doing the basics. How many of you would you say kind of sleep or eating or nutrition goes to the wayside when stress increases? And I am just looking at the chat. So yes, sleep definitely, absolutely, absolutely. Because I hear a lot, I don't have time to sleep. And what I generally say is you don't have time not to sleep. Because when we don't sleep, we become so much less efficient and less effective. The other piece of it is how do we think in a way that's actually helpful to us and doesn't hinder our process? So first off, we like to believe that if we have a thought that's anxiety provoking, we should avoid it. But the fact is that's truly actually not effective. What we need to do is acknowledge that thought. So if our dissertation is overwhelming us and we're like, well, just don't think about it. No. What we actually need to say to ourselves is, I'm having a thought about my dissertation and everything I need to do, and it's really overwhelming to me. When we say that and actually give it room and acknowledge it, what that does is it actually makes it more workable in our life. We can then sort of see it as an action plan instead of a thought that's overwhelming that just kind of scares us and then we push it away. We also want to challenge those negative and unhelpful thoughts. Now, when people hear challenge thoughts, a lot of times they think, well, that means I have to be optimistic. I say, no, that's not what that means. I'm a realist. So we can acknowledge both sides. So we can say, I have all of these balls in the air and it's really overwhelming. Well, that's true, right? So we can say to ourselves, okay, I do have all of these balls in the air. They are very overwhelming, but some of them I can actually do something about right now. So let me make a plan. Or we say, I can't do anything when I hear the word can't. Well, that's not true, because can't literally means we do not have the ability. And we actually do. Right now, we're just so overwhelmed that it feels like we can't. So if we take that step back and say, no, I can, I'm just feeling that way right now, that takes some of that pressure down. Another way is making sure that we prioritize tasks and responsibilities to kind of help our thoughts really regroup and have a more linear way to really see the challenges and all of those balls in the air. Now, this one, let go of self-criticism and social comparison, I say easier said than done. But what we do know is criticizing ourselves or comparing ourselves to others isn't helpful. What are some of the unhelpful things people say to themselves, they think? What are some of those self-critical things that they say? I'm a hot mess express. Oh yeah, that's a good one. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. Yes. I should be working more. Absolutely. Those insecurities. Right. These come up, especially when we're overwhelmed or we're working on, I never finished anything on time. Right. When we have so much going on and we just work, the likelihood of those insecurities, those self-criticisms to come up is so high. Another one is if I could just do X, then I would be able to do this. Absolutely. However, what we know is when we say those things to ourselves, it's not helpful. It actually stops us from being able to do what we need to do. So what we need to do is not necessarily let go of the self-criticism. We do, but we need to really reframe it and say, well, should I be working more? Well, is it actually possible for me to be working more? Maybe. But if I work more, am I actually going to get more done? Or am I just going to sit there and thinking and worrying about getting more done? Because a lot of times when we try to push through it, what we do is we just sit there and freak out for an hour instead of taking a break for 15 minutes and then returning to our work where we can work more efficiently and effectively. So how do we say to ourselves, well, I'm in a graduate program. They're letting me stay. Everyone else around me is telling me I'm doing a good job. So not everyone in my life can be lying to me. So I must be doing something well. So I kind of have to believe that. So how we kind of challenge some of these self-criticisms and realize that they're not helping us they're actually hurting us and stopping us from doing a better job. And then practicing acceptance and forgiveness. Now, this one's important because the definition is very important in that acceptance doesn't mean we have to like it, doesn't mean we have to condone it, doesn't mean we have to ask for it to happen again. What acceptance really means is we're acknowledging that what's happening is happening. And then once we can do that, then we can say, okay, what do I do next? I understand this is the reality of the situation. What do I do next? And also recognizing that forgiveness is not about the other person, it's about us. When we forgive something, it's not about letting that person off the hook or excusing their behaviors. It's about allowing ourselves to no longer experience so much anger that it takes up that much space in our life. So it frees that space for something else to happen. So I love this quote. Take care of your body. It's the only place you have to live. Because I think it really depicts, it's so true. And we forget about that if we don't take a good care of ourselves, it truly is the only place we have to live is in our body. And so there's many types of self-care. Someone mentioned that before, which was great. Thank you for whoever did that. And these are 8 big domains of self-care. So what I would love everyone to do is, as you're looking at this, pick out 2 or 3 of these areas that you say, when I engage in this type of self-care, it's the most helpful for me. Not everyone's going to do all 8. So we have the physical one, which that includes working and sleep and physical activity. We have emotional, which is stress management. We have the social, that's the friend piece. We have the spiritual, and that can be anything. That can be religious, but it does not have to be. So it can be spiritual, yoga, meditation. We have the personal one, space as well, financial, and work. So think about the types of self-care that really work for you and try to think of 2 or 3 of these categories that you're like, I think all my self-care kind of fits into these. What are some people's thoughts? Which ones did people identify for themselves? Physical, emotional, social? Great. Yes, absolutely. What are some others? Physical and space? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, more spiritual. Absolutely. Kind of doing some rituals that feel very soothing and relaxing. Beautiful. Absolutely. Financial. Yes, very much so. So the next thing that I would like people to do is I actually want you to pull out your phone and I want you to open the notes tab of your phone. And in that, I want you to begin to write some of those self-care activities that you really enjoy. On here, there's some lists of that as well. So getting plenty of sleep, enjoying the sunshine, cooking. I prefer baking, but to each their own on that one. Writing or drawing, that could also include painting. This one even says talking to yourself. Sometimes we need to talk ourselves through things. Cuddling with your cat, your dog, your kid, a guinea pig, that's okay too. Walking, running. So I want everyone to identify, if they don't mind, some self-care activities and really write those down in your phone. And the reason why I want people to write them down is when we become overstressed and we're juggling everything, sometimes we don't feel like we have the mental space to think about, what do I do to feel better? So I think really thinking about, and if you suddenly go out to coffee with a friend and leave and you're like, I feel so much better, put it on the list, coffee with a friend. Because that way we don't have to think about, well, what do I do now to feel better? Nope, we just open the notes tab on our phone, we read, and we make a decision on which ones to do. I also encourage people that when they make this self-care list, they have items that take 5 minutes and they have items that take an hour. Sometimes we don't have an hour, but most of the time we have 5 minutes. So we want some that also take varying levels of time. That way we're never left without a self-care activity, without a way to de-stress and kind of take that down a little bit for ourselves. So another way to help us manage stress in this process is dealing with stressors that we can't control. We as humans, we love control. It's like our favorite thing is to control things. But there's so many things that we actually can't control. And most of the time, we spend a lot of time worrying about those exact things, which then makes us miss the things that we can do something about. So the first thing is we have to acknowledge our feelings and the source of those feelings, but the actual source. So what do I mean by that? I may be going through my day and I'm really stressed, and then I drop my keys on the ground and my purse spills and I start bawling my eyes out. Is it truly because I dropped my purse and my keys? No. It's probably of the 50 other million things I'm stressed about. This one just happened to be the straw that broke the camel's back. And so I started crying. And so really part of our job is to say, so what am I really stressed about? What are in that depths of my brain that I'm really thinking about? That's just really the thing that is kind of sending me to the top of my stress level. The next is we actually want to allow ourselves to experience these feelings. I encourage people to use the feeling wheel. You can Google it. I love it. It gives us a whole list of feelings that are above and beyond sad, mad, happy, overwhelmed, anxious. It gives us a variety of feelings to choose from. And when we know the feeling, then we can do something about it. But if we're misidentifying the feeling, it makes it a lot harder for then to us to use a coping skill that attacks that feeling. So we want to allow ourselves to experience the feeling, not take us over, but experience it. The research actually supports that if we identify how we're feeling, the intensity of that feeling goes down by itself. It may not go from 10 to 1, but it could go from 10 to 8. And that then gives us time to use a coping skill. The next thing I suggest is we identify things that we can and cannot control about that situation. For example, when we're writing our dissertation, I can control that I hand edits into my chair on time. What I can't control is when they return them to me. It doesn't matter. As long as I turn my side in on time, I just kind of have to play a waiting game. But a lot of times we sit around stressing about when they're going to get them back to us, which makes sense, but we can't control that. That's up to then our chair to get them back to us. So thinking about in every situation, what can we actually do something about versus what's out of our control? Another one is calling the doctor and waiting for them to call us back to make an appointment. All I can do is call the doctor. I then have to wait for them to return my call. Then we want to attend to the things that we actually can control. If we can make a phone call, let's make it. If we can do those edits, let's do them. But we need to just attend to the things that we know we can do something about. And then after we acknowledge our feelings, how do we then reframe the challenge? How do we say to ourselves, again, in more of that realistic piece of, okay, this is really hard. This is really tough. This is really fill in the blank. But I am able to do something about it, even if it's just this piece. And then after this piece, I have to wait, and then I can do my next piece. So really putting that piece into perspective. Does that make sense to everyone? Now, this is clearly easier said than done. Okay, so I say it with ease, but it is a challenge. However, it can also be very effective. The next piece is, and I'm kind of curious what people think, is time management. So we have to develop an organizational system that works best for us. And so I love planners, but I also know that the demands of my life have changed over time, which has required me to shift the type of planner that I use. In undergrad, I used one type. When I went to graduate school, I used a completely different type. And in my present day, I use a very different type as well. And so it's very much finding what system works for you in the stage of life that you're in. Even when you're a first year doctoral student and all you're doing is taking classes, you might be able to use one type of planner, but then you get into your second and third and fourth year where now you're either a teaching assistant or a professor. or helping your professor, or you're now doing research, or you're now doing a practicum or a field placement, or an internship. And so now you have to be 4 different places in one day. And you need to be able to manage that time on top of life things like going to appointments or having lunch or picking something up at the grocery store. And so thinking about what is the best way for me to sort of plan and organize my time and my tasks. I wonder what some other strategies people use are. Do people use to-do lists? Do they use their phones? A bullet journal. I've heard so many wonderful things about bullet journals and fun stickers. Oh, love fun stickers. Um, Absolutely. To-do list, shared to-do lists. Absolutely. Bullet journal. That is basically, and anyone who does it can correct me if they're wrong. Basically what it is it's a journal, but it has bullet points. So you just basically write down everything that you need to do. Oh, someone's showing it. Perfect. I've heard great things about bullet journals. People like them a lot. I've heard good things about the moleskin journals as well. People really love those. A whiteboard, absolutely. A calendar on your phone, yes. I love Post-its on my computer, like the actual electronic Post-its and a real Post-it, planners. Very good. Yep. So what I encourage people to do is find the system that works for them. And if that system stops working, find a new one. Odds are you're going to have to change systems throughout your life because the balls that you're juggling, the demands that you have in your life are going to shift as you age and just as the demands shift with you. So thinking about that as well. So if one stops working, it's not you, it's the demands in your life that are calling for a change. One really helpful thing in the process of graduate school too is SMART goals. So if you've heard of these, wonderful. If you haven't, hopefully this is a concept that will help you. We tend to make to-do lists like write a paper, clean my house, write chapter 3 of my dissertation. Well, those are overwhelming. And so what SMART goals do is they break them down into more manageable tasks. So that list of 3 items may turn into a list of 20. But what it does is it takes all of the thinking out of our brain and puts it onto a piece of paper. Because regardless if we're making SMART goals on our to-do list, we're doing them in our head because we're thinking of the steps required to do a task. So it spells the acronym SMART, but first it's specific. So if our goal is chapter 3 of my dissertation, okay, that can be my overarching goal. But the first thing that I need to do is the first SMART goal would be write the first paragraph of this section, which is about this. Or it could be find 2 articles about this specific topic. So if we go with the find 2 articles about this specific topic, that's specific. We know what we're looking for. We know what topic we're searching. We know how many we're doing. Is it measurable? Yes, because when we find 2 articles that are good, we're done. That was the only requirement of that goal. Is it attainable? Yes, we can reasonably do that. We know how to take the steps to do that. Is it relevant, but also can be realistic? So is it relevant to what I'm doing, and is it realistic that I can get it done? And I normally say in one sitting. Yes, I can find 2 articles on a specific topic. And time bound or timely, I generally think of as, can I do it generally in one sitting? And one sitting a lot of times is about 45 minutes to an hour. That's normally how long we can focus for a good quality amount of time. Now, my next SMART goal may be to find 2 more articles. My third SMART goal may be to read one article and highlight it, and I identify which article I'm reading and highlighting. So as you can see, my write chapter 3 has now turned into 30 item to-do list. But what happens is we can then mark them off as we go. So now we know where we are in the process. Also, if we have an hour between classes and we really feel motivated to do something, we can look at our to-do list and be like, oh, I can read that article in 30 minutes. Let me pull that one out and just read it quickly and highlight it. Well, then something goes off our to-do list because we already had it laid out for us. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have questions on how to use those? I want to make sure, because this is a really helpful tool. Yes, and someone said that they love that they can do it in one sitting, and I really encourage people to do the one sitting task, the one sitting sort of piece if they can help it with certain things. Sometimes you can't, but it is better to think about it in that kind of chunk of time because then it feels more doable. We feel less overwhelmed. If something sits on our to-do list for a week, we don't feel that great about it. But if something only sits in our to-do list for a day, we feel a little bit better. And when people use to-do lists as well, a lot of times with SMART goals, yes, I love whoever said this, the bite-sized pieces, you can't eat the entire meal at once. Absolutely. I also say Rome was not built in a day, that saying, right? So we're not going to write our dissertation the same way. It's going to take time, brick by brick, to lay it out. And so if we can do this, a lot of times it can help us to just organize and see our own process. The second piece is I sometimes will encourage people to make a to-do list for their week. And that's kind of like what I refer to as your master to-do list. And then every day look at that to-do list and say, what can I reasonably get done today? Because what if Monday, Wednesday, Fridays you teach and you have to pick your child up from daycare and you have to do something else? Well, the odds of you doing 5 additional homework assignments that day, probably less. So maybe you do 1 or 2 of those items off the list. And then Tuesday, Thursdays, when you're like, oh, I can definitely do 5 or 6 because all I have to do is focus on my work today. So I sometimes will encourage a master to-do list and then a to-do list on a daily basis. So then how do we bring this all together into getting our dissertation written? Which we know is such a very fun process and very overwhelming all at the same time. First, I encourage people to make their own class. So plan out a time in which same day, same time, every week in which you are going to do work on your dissertation. Because you get credit hours for it, but there's no class time. That's on you. And so then when we go to class, a lot of times I'll say, bring your SMART goals. What do you plan to accomplish in that class? I also encourage people to go someplace else. I wrote my dissertation at Bob Evans. I would go in the morning and I would ask for a corner table where I would bother no one and say, I'm going to be sitting here for a few hours. Is that going to be bothering anyone? They would say no. They were very nice. I'd go sit in my little corner and I would literally work on my dissertation for 3 hours once a week at Bob Evans. And then other times I'd go to a different place, but once a week I'd go there and I would work on it for 3 hours and I'd bring my SMART goals with me so that I accomplished what I needed to accomplish. And I was in a different space. I was eating. And that was kind of like my thinking place. If people have ever heard of also state-dependent learning, we recall things when the surroundings around us are similar. And so that always meant I was there to work. That was kind of where I was most efficient. And then I would have another day that I did more work at a different place, but I normally went to the same place. So I encourage people, class, make your own class. But also plan fun time eating, sleeping, and exercise as well. So if you sit down and you actually work a full 3 hours, probably shifting tasks because that's the way we think best. But if we work the full 3 hours, then I say, go have coffee with a friend, go for a walk, go to the gym before you go to your next activity so you have time to kind of refocus on something. A lot of times I'll get students that come into the counseling center that I say, let's do coping skills. And their first thing they say to me is, I don't have time for that. And I say, what you don't have actually time for is to waste time because you're too tired worrying about everything else. You spend an hour worrying about not getting anything done, which you could then spend 15 minutes going for a walk, deep breathing, calling a friend. So then when you went back to that task, you would actually be more efficient and effective. So what you don't have time for is to not cope. Overestimate the amount of time it is going to take you. Humans are chronic underestimators of the amount of time it takes to complete a task. If you think, oh yeah, I got this in an hour, schedule an hour and a half or an hour and 45 minutes. We're terrible at actually estimating the amount of time it takes us to do something. And then if we have this beautiful to-do list, but it's planned out from pieces of time, and then we run over, then we freak out, and then we self-criticize, and then the cycle starts over. So do yourself a favor. It's better to say, oh, I'm done 30 minutes early, and then say, I can move to the next task, or breathe, one or the other. That sounds great, than to feel like we're constantly running behind. The last piece is prioritize tasks. If you have something that's easy and it's due in 2 months, but you have something that's due in 2 days, do the thing in 2 days. Don't do the thing in 2 months. When we write our dissertation, I think sometimes because we're collecting data and we're writing chapters and we're editing pieces and we're doing different things, there's so many moving pieces in dissertation writing. Sometimes we don't know where is the most efficient and effective place to start. My suggestion there is ask your chair. Ask your chair what they would prioritize. They may just give you a vague answer, but at least it gives you a domain to begin with. They're probably not going to give you the step-by-step plan because that's not necessarily their responsibility. But since research is probably part of their job, and they've done it probably a significant amount, they can kind of guess the natural flow. And so with that, we can use their knowledge to benefit us. So if we're not sure of the next step or the natural flow, ask. Say, what would you prioritize? So that can give you guidance on what you think would be the most helpful to do next. Does anyone have thoughts or even questions on this piece? Yes, so it's hard to prioritize tasks when teaching and other responsibilities are more urgent. And so the dissertation, yes, gets pushed. Yes, absolutely. And that's why I encourage people to set that class time, because when we're taking classes and teaching and we have other things to do, it is so easy for those to take precedent, because in reality, they kind of have to, right? Because one's due tomorrow versus our dissertation's due in 2 years. But unfortunately, what happens is if it gets pushed back too far, then we get pushed back really far. And what you may notice is our case never lightens up. There's never a time where we're suddenly like, oh yes, now it's time to always do my dissertation. So I have trouble showing up for commitments to myself. Yes, so the classway is a good way to work around, especially too, because if we're willing to give up, like, oh, I was going to work on my dissertation, but that sounds like more fun, so I'm going to do that. It's, yes, some days we may want to do that, right? We may want to call out of class. But I find that if we just naturally put it into our schedule, that we're less likely to then push something off, because then we begin planning everything around that class time as well. So someone also mentioned focusmate.com is an accountability buddy website. So that helps to schedule class time. So that's a great one. So focusmate.com is what someone is saying. So that might be something to check into. I've never heard of that, but thank you. That's really helpful. Those are all the pieces that I have. Yeah, absolutely. If you guys need anything from the Counseling Center, please feel free to call our phone number. You can also go to our website, counseling.fsu.edu, and you can initiate services 8 to 5 or 8 to 4 Monday through Friday. So if you need us, that is where we are, and don't hesitate to use us. That is what we're there for. So thank you again for having me back for this. I love really presenting to this group of individuals. It's such a pleasure. So thank you.